Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be doing another French Country Christmas ornament. For my project, I'm going to be using this 10cm wide ornament blank that I got from eBay. I will link that down in the description, and I'm just going to be using some of my Gorilla Super Glue Gel to glue the two sides together. I'm then going to use a wet wipe to wipe off the excess glue. Once the glue was dry, I took out Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in grey, and I'm applying that with a makeup sponge in a dabbing motion. I'm using a makeup sponge so that I don't get any brush strokes. I'm going to do one coat, let it dry for about an hour, then I'll do my second coat and give that a few hours as well to dry. When that primer was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint, and I'm going to be applying that with a makeup sponge as well. I ended up doing 3 coats of this because I am trying to cover over the top of that grey primer. Now, I have had people ask me, why are you using grey and then coming in with white paint? Well, that's just what I had open at the time. Once that was dry, I took out some masking tape. I want to create some grain sack style stripes. So I'm going to be putting that tape on my shirt first a few times just to get rid of a lot of that stickiness so it doesn't take off my paint. And then I'm going to position that in the center of my ornament. I'm using the ornament hanging attachment as a guide, and then I'm going to press that down. And then I'm going to take another piece of sticky tape. Again, I'm going to get off most of that stickiness just by putting it on and off my shirt a few times. And then I'm going to make a thinner little stripe on the side there, and you definitely will need to do this a little bit at a time, and I just did it by eye. This is a bit of a strange surface. You've got curves all over the place that you have to take into account, so I couldn't really use a stencil unfortunately, so this is how I decided to approach it. So I have the 2 lines going down the side there, and then I'm going to put a few bits of tape up the top just to get a nice neat line. I'm not worried about the bottom section because I'm going to have molds down there. I then took out Paint Couture's Red Velvet Mineral Paint, and I am offloading a lot of my paint onto a paper towel, and then I'm running my brush along the masking tape lines. I'm not using too much paint, and I'm just making sure that in each section that I'm working on that masking tape is stuck down well, and then I'm applying my paint. I'm just going to be doing 1 coat here, and I don't mind if there are certain areas that are darker than others, maybe some areas that you can see some of that buttercream showing through, because I do want a vintage French country look. I'm then going to remove the tape while my paint is still wet. I don't want to risk that paint drying and holding that tape in place. I noticed there was a little bit in a section where I didn't want it to be, so I quickly went in there with a wet wipe and pulled just a little bit of that back. When those lines were dry, I took out some more masking tape. This time I'm going to go either side of the ornament hanging attachment, and I can see through the tape, so I'm also using that as a guide as for how wide I want that space in between to be. So again, this is going to be to personal taste depending on how you want your grain sack stripe to look, or maybe you want it to look more like thin ticking. This is just the way that I decided to approach it. My center line is just going to be just a little bit thicker than the other 2 lines. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for watching my ornament series videos. I know I've been doing quite a few of them, but I'm just really having a lot of fun coming up with all these ideas for different style ornaments. Now that I have the center line masked off, I am going to repeat that same process as before using the Red Velvet Mineral Paint, and I am going to be adding paint to that center section. Again, I'm happy for my brush to skip over some of the texture on the ornament already. We want that to look like a vintage and worn grain sack stripe. While the paint is still wet, I am going to remove that tape, and I'm definitely happy with how this looks. I let this dry, and then I came in with that same sponge that I was using with the buttercream to start off with, and I'm just going to go in and dab a few marks on top of that grain sack stripe to give it more of a worn appearance. Now, you could probably use sandpaper, but I have found when I use that with red, sometimes you get that red dust and it can tint your paint around it. So this was a good alternative, I thought. Anywhere that I get it a little bit too heavy, I'm able to go in and pull that back a little bit with a wet wipe, because that red velvet mineral paint has a built-in top coat. If you didn't want your stripes to look this distressed, obviously you could leave this step out, and maybe red isn't for you. Maybe you want to come in with a different color. So this is definitely a project that you can customize to your taste. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin, and I'm going to brush on a coat over the top of the entire ornament. So that's going to seal everything in before I move on to my next step. I let that dry, and then I took out IOD's Jingle mold. Now this is from 2 years ago, I think it was, and I'm going to dust the forward-facing reindeer stag with cornstarch, and then I'm going to start working my Das air dry clay into that mold, and I'm pushing out the excess using that micro rim to help me get a clean edge. And this guy can be a little bit tricky. His antlers are very fragile, so if you're having trouble, pop it in the freezer for about 10 minutes. A lot of people have found success doing it that way. I, however, just went with it, and I do end up having a little bit of a breakage a bit later on, but honestly, I'm going for a vintage look anyway, so I was able to glue those bits back together. I then took out IOD's Oh Christmas Tree mold. This was from last year's holiday release, and I am working my clay into part of the garland design there on the right hand side. Once I'm happy with that, I am going to bend and flex that mold, and then I will pull that clay out. I did then dust the same design again, and I'm going to cast the same one again, so I want 2 of those. Next, I took out my Sealy's Quick Set wood glue, and I'm going to be using that to attach my castings. You saw I had a little bit of breakage there on the antler. That's not really an issue. I will just glue that back in place, which you will see shortly. So I'm just spreading that glue gently over the back of the reindeer, and I'm going to position that in the center but down the bottom. And then I'm going to sort of fan out the antlers a little bit so that there is a bit more of a gap in the center, because we are going to be putting a stamp there a bit later. And then going to add some glue to the bottom part of the broken off piece of antler, and I'm going to glue that in place. I'm then going to take that Oh Christmas Tree garland, and I'm going to add some glue to the back of this and spread that glue out so we've got even coverage. And then I'm going to position that down the bottom, but I'm going to have it curving up in sort of like a laurel sort of a design. I did this on the previous ornament that I did, and as I was working on that one, I was thinking about ideas for how else I could use this composition. So I decided to keep the laurel design, but try a different reindeer this time. I'm then going to add some glue to the back of the other laurel, and I'm going to position that on the opposite side. And that's why I love using clay, because you can layer those castings over the top of each other and you can get a really beautiful, unique design. The bottom was looking a little bit bulky, so I took out my palette knife, and I'm going to come in now and start cutting away some of that excess that we don't need. Just like I did with my ornament in my last video, I'm going to be using this mold that I got from Amazon. I've already dusted it with cornstarch. I'm going to be casting the larger of the bow designs here, and I'm just pressing out that excess clay. These don't have a micro rim, sadly. They're not the same quality as IOD, so I am just having to be very careful, make sure I don't push too much out. And then I'm going to flex the mold, and then I am going to start bending it back and gently pulling out my bow casting. I'm then going to be adding some of my Sealy's Quick Set wood glue to the back of the bow casting, and I'm going to be positioning that down the bottom underneath the reindeer. And then I'm going to be adjusting the tails of the ribbon so that they sit up a little bit higher. I let the castings dry overnight, and then the next day I came in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I'm going to begin by adding it to the stag head first. I'm going to work in sections. I have sealed my paint, however, so I know that I will be able to wipe back as much or as little as I would like. I definitely have to be careful around the antlers of the reindeer because these can be quite fragile. So once I've worked that glaze into all of those areas, I'm going to use a wet wet wipe to dab and pull back some of that glaze. Next, I started adding the glaze over the top of the garlands. So I have got the paint behind the castings all sealed up, but the clay itself is unsealed and I haven't added any paint over the top of those because it's already a nice white color. So I didn't feel the need to add in that extra step. So now I'm coming in with a wet wipe and pulling that glaze back from the high points on the garland, and I'm loving the definition and depth that that glaze is creating on those garlands. Once I finished adding it to the garlands, I then started adding the glaze over the top of the bow. I decided to keep the back of the ornament pretty simple, but I am going to go in with what glaze is left on my brush and use that same wet wipe that I was using before just to give the back a sort of an antiqued aged look. When that was dry, I took out IOD's Merry and Bright stamp. This is unfortunately another retired design, sorry guys, and I am going to be using this lovely Merry Christmas text. I'm using IOD's permanent black ink. I'm dabbing some of that on. I did use a wet wipe to remove some of the ink that I got around the outside of the stamp. Then I'm going to position it in between the antlers, but I am mainly lining it up with the center of the grain sack stripe, and then I'm pressing down, and I've always got one hand holding it in place while the other hand moves around and applies pressure. When the ink was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Lux Metallic, and I'm going to be adding some of that on the hanging attachment up the top there, and just tidying that up as well, making sure that the section where it meets the rest of the ornament looks tidy. And then I'm going to start adding it to the bow down the bottom. Now I don't need full coverage here. I am definitely happy for some of that buttercream with the glaze to peek through. That'll definitely be in keeping with that French country vintage look. I then moved on and started adding some to the Stag's antlers. And I really like how that's going to tie in with the bow, so definitely love bringing in some metallics. I then decided to add some of that bronze to the garland. I'm just going to pick a couple of the areas on the garland that look like lights or Christmas decorations, and I'm going to add some of that bronze just to add some interest. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. When the bronze was dry, I took out the same brush that I was using with the buttercream. I got a little bit more on my brush, but ultimately I am doing some dry brushing over the top of the high points on the reindeer face. I just wanted to lighten that up just a little bit, make it stand out just a little bit more. I also added a little bit more paint and then offloaded a lot of it onto a paper towel. And I also went a little bit on the antlers, not much though, because we do have that beautiful bronze. And then I did go over some of the high points on the garland. Again, I'm trying not to go over the top of the bronzed areas. In hindsight, I definitely should have done this before I started adding the bronze, but sometimes you don't know exactly where you're going with something until a little bit later on in the project. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1, and I'm going to be applying it just to the garland. I am using this product like a glue because we are going to be adding some glitter, and this is a really great medium to use as a glue because as it dries, it becomes sticky and tacky to the touch. So it's one of my favorite things to use because it also dries really clear. After about 30 minutes of dry time, I took out Paint Couture's Sheer Frost German Glass Glitter. This is one of my favorite glitters to use. It's like a clear sort of a glitter, so it's perfect for your more neutral projects. And then I just started applying that over the top of the sections where I have that Crackle Step 1. I've got a plastic sheet underneath my glitter container. I'm also doing it a little bit over the top of the Sheer Frost glitter container itself, and then I'm dabbing that off. I am also going to use my fingers to pull a little bit more off the garlands just to make sure it's not too heavy. And then I started adding it to the other side on that garland as well, just repeating those same steps. Finally, I then took out some green velvet ribbon and I am going to be threading that through the top. Sometimes I like to use some tweezers to help me get it through those tight spots there. And then I am going to be pulling the two ends together, making sure that they are the same length approximately. I'm also going to tidy up the ends as well, make sure we don't have any excess little bits of ribbon fraying coming away there. And then I'm going to tie a knot. And here's a look at our Christmas ornament. I really love how this turned out. I definitely wanted to experiment with layering different techniques, doing the grain sack stripe underneath the molds, and I'm definitely happy with how this came together. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.